United States Senate because I've come to believe that our federal government is too big, that it costs too much money, that it plays way too big of a role in our lives. But the reason we've gotten to this place, where we're required to work 3 or 4 or 5 months out of every year just to pay our federal taxes, only to be told that we're almost $14 trillion in debt. The reason we are in this position is because Congress has for far too long overlooked this document, the Constitution of the United States, the document that created Congress, and the document that establishes the ground rules for Congress's operation. But it can be as effective in limiting the powers of government, only as effective as members of Congress are willing to give it credit for limiting their power. They need to not wait for the Supreme Court to tell them what they can get away with. They need to restrain themselves based on the notion of limited powers, which was the fundamental force behind the American Revolution and the fundamental force behind the Constitutional Convention of 1787. You see, as it turns out, the American Revolution wasn't just about getting rid of the king. It was about the fact that we were subject, once before, to a national government that was far from us, slow to respond to the needs of the people, taxed us too much, regulated us too heavily, and failed to respect laws passed by local legislative bodies. It sounds familiar. It sounds all too familiar. What they discovered is that national governments inevitably become tyrants. And this is true whether those national governments are headed by a king or by an elected president, or even by an elected president who thinks he's a king. It's the same result. I was speaking to a group of delegates, about 100 of them, recently down in London. After I spent an hour or two answering lots and lots of questions, still there were a few hands up, and my campaign staff informed me that we had time for only 2 more questions. My wife was quick to point out that the last questioner needed to be a young girl who had sat patiently with her hand raised, but had somehow gone unnoticed. And I decided that she could get to ask the last question for the night, even though there were others who still wanted to ask them, given our time constraints. Her question was deep and insightful. She said, "Can you please tell us what happens to us if we fail to follow the Constitution as a country?" Let me tell you what happens when we fail to follow the Constitution, when Congress fails to follow it. Congress starts having the idea that it can solve all of our problems. And in doing that, it starts to redistribute our wealth. But guess what? Try as you might to find the power in this document to redistribute wealth, to take from those who have and give to others, other people's property. That violates the Constitution.